begin transmission. As we begin to talk about more terrestrial organisms and move away from fish to tetrapods, animals with limbs that can walk on land, we are going to talk about amphibians. Amphibians are kind of this transitional group between the fully aquatic fish and the fully terrestrial reptiles and mammals and birds. Amphibians kind of have a foot in both lives. Usually as immatures, they live in the water, and as adults, they live on the land, and they undergo this metamorphosis to go from larval stages to adult stages, like a tadpole to a frog. Well, oftentimes this development is arrested in the larval stage, and this is called pedomorphosis, where the larval stage basically persists until the adult stage. So we can see this in one particularly remarkable organism, this animal here. This is an axolotl. Axolotls are found in freshwater lakes, and they're remarkable. So we can see the features here. We see those frills coming out. Those are the gills, and this is a distinct larval characteristic because the larvae are aquatic. So they're going to use gills to breathe dissolved oxygen in the water. And it has a nice finned tail, and it doesn't have lungs. It has webbed feet. So these are all larval characteristics, but this is an adult organism. And so this is an adult organism that has retained features of the juvenile stage. But that's not what's really remarkable about the axolotl. The axolotl is an animal with, we think because it's kind of in this state of arrested development, it has the ability to regenerate tissue. So if it loses a limb, it can regrow a limb. And this is a phenomenally complex limb, right? It's not the same as a flatworm regrowing itself or a sea anemone regrowing part of itself. The limb has blood vessels and skin tissue and bones and remarkably nerves. The axolotl can regenerate nervous tissue. And so it can regenerate limbs, it can regenerate organs, it can regenerate even neurons themselves. And so even if it loses part of its brain can regenerate. Not its entire brain, obviously. Well, not necessarily obviously, but there are certain regions of its brain that aren't regenerative. But significant portions of its central nervous system, the most complex part of a vertebrate's anatomy, can be regenerated, and this is phenomenal. And they're also adorable, right? So they quickly become our crew's one of our crew's favorite animals. We all like them. Vector in particular has taken a keen interest in them, and his quarters have filled up with tanks upon tanks upon tanks with these axolotls. I'm not precisely sure what he's doing with them, but everyone's happy to have more of them around because they're adorable and they're spectacular with pretty awesome superpowers. So today we'll learn more about the axolotl and its relatives, the amphibians, and we'll only learn a few. It's a fairly small group, and we're just looking for major representatives of every lineage. Amphibians are some of my favorite animals. They're still kind of tethered to the water, but they live a lot of their life on land, especially as adults, and they just have a remarkable diversity of forms and sizes. And most of the time, if you capture them just right, it looks like they're smiling or they're really grumpy. So the facial expressions on amphibians, if you anthropomorphize them a little bit, are always pretty spectacular. So there's the frogs, salamanders, toads, and caecilians. And we'll just get one example of each of those and talk a little bit about my favorite animal, the axolotl. Not my favorite. You know, that's not fair. There's so many favorites, but the axolotl is maybe top 10 or top 100 at least, right? Anyway, so amphibians. We will begin with class Amphibia, order Gymnophiona. So remember, this is an infraphylum Gnathostomata. These are jawed vertebrates with notochords, and amphibians are animals that require moist skin for breathing, most of them, and they usually lay eggs in water, although not all of them. There's complications. And the order Gymnophiona are the caecilians. Caecilians are really strange animals. Most of them are limbless, and you can kind of see that they almost have rings, so they look very, very annelid-like. So how do you tell the difference between an annelid, a little earthworm, and a caecilian like a Chordata that you see here? Well, an obvious feature is their jaws. So if the earthworm has jaws, it's not an earthworm. It is a Gnathostomate. So caecilians are similar to earthworms in that they burrow, but they're predators. They're not really decomposers. And they eat earthworms and beetles and grubs that they find underneath the soil with their jaws. So, but you can kind of infer from their burrowing lifestyle some adaptations. So you think about sensory organs, eyes aren't going to be very important, so most of them are blind. But vibrations are going to be really important. So they're very sensitive to vibrations. They have special hairs that will detect vibrations under the soil. And so hearing is very important. Smell is pretty important. Sight is not very important at all. Their foreheads are kind of shovel-shaped and hardened with bone to kind of dig through the soil more efficiently. And they make pretty good parents, usually the females, but in some species both parents will provide some extended parental care for their little younglings there. A Chordata is also interesting because on its moist skin it secretes a mild neurotoxic venom, and so predators generally avoid these creatures. And they're pretty rare, so if you find one, take a good picture. I'd like to see one. I haven't ever seen one in real life. So this is a Chordata, the caecilian, a limbless burrowing amphibian with a mild neurotoxic skin. And then here's the happy little axolotl. See what I was saying about the mouth? It looks like it's smiling and it's happy. Pretty adorable creatures. As I said earlier, these guys are stuck in their larval stage for most of their adult lives, so they don't transform from immatures to mature forms. So as adults, they retain their gills and their fins and a little bit of their webbed feet, although in this specimen the webbed feet are mostly reduced. And their primary superpower is their incredible regenerative properties. So you chop an arm off, it will regrow an arm, sometimes two arms, so you get double arms. It can even regrow its central nervous system. So this is the most spectacularly regenerative vertebrate that we know of, and there's some really interesting things that we can research from this creature here. Now this one is another salamander. Salamanders are my favorite kinds of amphibians, so I included two. These are both in order Urodela. Euro means tail. We're going to contrast this with the anurans, the frogs and toads without tails. So order Urodela are the salamanders, and newts and their relatives. This one is the largest salamander that we've discovered, Andreas. Andreas is the giant salamander and is native to Japan and China. Because we named those regions on this planet. And some members of the crew think of it as a delicacy, so they hunt it and eat it. I do not approve. That's not the way you should treat salamanders. But these giant salamanders can get 4 feet long. They primarily inhabit cool mountain streams, rivers. They need a pretty large body of water to support their prodigious mass. When they're young, they actually hunt in packs, so they coordinate hunting as a group of siblings, and then as they age and get larger, they become solitary. Very interesting looking creatures. They just blend right into the rocks. On land, they're not very graceful, but you can just see how massive they are. Could you imagine picking that thing up? How cold, slimy it would feel if you just gave it a big old hug. They're massive. So very, very, very gigantic salamanders. Seems like something out of a Jurassic Park movie or something, a Permian Park or something. But that's Andreas, the giant salamander. Order Anura are going to be the amphibians that are tailless as adults, and this is going to include frogs and toads. One of my favorite frogs is Phyllobates. These are remarkably colored poison frogs, poison arrow, poison dart frogs. Because I imagine if you had an arrow or a dart and you were some prehistoric tribe that still used projectile weapons, unlike our advanced laser weapons, and you had a dart or an arrow and you rubbed the tip on the back of this frog skin, it would be a very deadly weapon, because this frog has one of the most potent drop-for-drop neurotoxic venoms in nature, and it is incredibly effective, will paralyze and kill any potential predator that's trying to eat it. So Phyllobates is the poison arrow frog. They're often brightly colored. This is an aposematic coloration, most likely to stand out from the background and say, "Don't eat me, I am toxic." So a lot of species actually protect their young as tadpoles. The tadpoles will wiggle up on the backs and absorb some of the neurotoxin and get protection via their parents. So pretty remarkable animals. Phyllobates is the poison dart frog. And this grumpy guy is our last amphibian that we should know. This is a toad. And frogs and toads, there's not really a very clear distinction between them. Frogs are generally more moist, and toads are usually drier, but there's not an actual biological difference really between them. Rumor has it if you kiss a toad, you will get warts, but I have tried that, and it has only been 50% true. So hit or miss depending on what you're wanting. I do want to point out these massive warts here. This is a parotid gland, and the parotid gland is a toxic venom producing gland, and it's particularly bad for small vertebrate predators like raccoons or dogs or cats. Or snakes. Sometimes it will kill snakes. And so Rhinella is the cane toad, a very famous species that is readily invasive in other environments. And when it's invasive in other environments, the local predators don't know how toxic it is. And so you can see a tremendous decline in predators in any ecosystem it invades. So the cane toad is Rhinella, a very dangerous invasive species with toxic parotid glands and a grumpy face.